one of the most influential ideologues of jihadism in specific and Islamism generally is a man by the name of Sayyid Qutb. Sayyid Qutb was eventually executed for writing a book called Milestones, which went on to become the Das Kapital for jihadists. It was their theoretical outline, their blueprint of how to bring about the Islamist revolution. Now this man, Sayyid Qutb, his background was that he was a very liberal man who had been a literary critic and was not a theologian. He came to the United States of America for a visit and was disgusted by what he considered was the hedonism, the loose morals, the lax behavior, and generally the degrading sort of morals that he said he witnessed. He went on to write about this experience and wrote about how women were showing their shoulders and their elbows, which seems as if it aroused certain feelings in him that he couldn't perhaps deal with. And he went on to write a pamphlet called Al-Amrika Allati Ra'aytuha, or The America That I Saw. And in that pamphlet he spoke about the corruption and the decadence in Western society, specifically in America, and how that corruption, if it was allowed to spread in the Muslim world, would lead to the same moral outrageous behavior that he was concerned with. And so in response to, as an antidote to that decadence, he decided to write about Islamism and how Islamism is the solution to society's ills. And having spent the same time in the same prison as Sayyid Qutb, having been in prison with a man who smuggled out the manuscript Milestones from that prison, Mazra'at Tora. And incidentally, keep in mind, this is the book that Sayyid Qutb was eventually executed for. So having been in that prison with the man who smuggled out the manuscript for that book, and now having come to America myself, I thought it would be appropriate to speak about the America that I saw. Because the America that I saw is absolutely in contrast to how Sayyid Qutb has described it. The feelings that he speaks about or spoke about that were aroused in him from the America that he saw, I have entirely different feelings. Having been from the same background, in the same prison, I've come here seeing something the opposite. America is not an enemy to Islam. The war in Iraq, the so-called war on terror, is not a war against Islam. And I see that from the hospitality, the enormous and generous hospitality that I've experienced here with the people here. I've seen the hope in their eyes as I speak about Islam being distinct to Islamism. I've seen how happy that makes them feel, how they feel that finally they found how Islam can fit into American society rather than be at perennial conflict against American society. I've seen the hope that they're filled with when they hear that. And when I was invited to the Senate here to speak about my experiences and to testify about Islamism and how to distinguish Islam from Islamism, I saw the concern in the senators themselves. The chair of the committee, Senator Lieberman, who's potentially a vice president of this country, and ranking member Collins, in their introductory remarks, I saw how concerned they were to state for the record that their problem is not with Islam, and in fact Islam is perfectly at home and welcome in this society. Now these are people in positions of power. They didn't have to show that concern, but they were very much concerned that Islam is not the target in this discussion, but rather the modern ideology of Islamism is. So with the welcome that I've been given, and the concern that's been shown for Islam as a faith, that Islam is not targeted and is not isolated, I've come to the exact opposite conclusion that Sayyid Qutb arrived at. The America that I saw is America that respects Islam as a faith. It's an America that wants a role for Islam as a faith in this society, but what it doesn't want is what anyone else would also not want, and that's for the modern ideology of Islamism to take over and to start enforcing its views on everybody else. And so I think the key to recognize is that America is not at war with Islam. America is accepting Islam. In fact, Islam is the fastest growing religion in America, and they have no problem with religion. And in fact, America is generally more a conservative society than Europe is. I think Sayyid Qutb got it wrong, and one wonders what he saw in the 50s that could have outraged him so much, and what his reaction would have been today if he saw how Western societies are compared to what they were in the 50s. And so to sum up these observations, I think it's important to recognize that America is, from its enshrined principles of freedoms, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, within that framework, America is perfectly happy for Muslims to give Muslims their freedom to practice their faith alongside people of all other other faiths as well. And historically, Muslims have never had a problem in living in societies where they're free to practice their faith. They've historically categorized such societies as Darul Islam, or the land of peace, because they've been allowed to have mosques. Their faith has been practiced openly and freely, and the key thing is to tolerate others who aren't Muslims, whose expression of either faith or freedom of speech is expressed in a different way. And that's what Sayyid Qutb couldn't appreciate or couldn't get his head around. What he described as the moral decadence in society of the 50s of America was in fact the manifestation of the freedoms, the same freedoms that allow Muslims to build mosques in this country. And that's at a time where people like Christians are not allowed to build mosques in certain Gulf countries. And in other countries, they have very, very bureaucratic procedures that end up in forbidding them or preventing them from building churches, because the red tape there is so much. Yet in America, Muslims are allowed to build mosques. It's the same freedoms that Sayyid Qutb was criticizing that allows for Muslims to be in this country.